The Hughes House was really state-of-the-art for 1953. Howard loved Las Vegas, so they had to break the one seal and then another seal and then get into the house.
Do you ever have girlfriends here?
It seems that he was disengaging from Hollywood.
You let him keep your jewels. We take the cash.
This is famous from Casino, the movie Casino.
This is an important piece of Las Vegas history.
I'm Brian Loftus.
And I'm Denise Valdez. You know, Howard Hughes loved Las Vegas, and you really can't tell the history of the city without putting that eccentric billionaire right in the middle of it.
You also can't tell the story of KLAS without Howard Hughes right in the middle of it. He once owned this station, and it is a story of movie stars, atomic bombs, top-line technology, and a missing will worth billions.
All right, so where we're standing is actually in the parking lot of our television station, and behind us is what we call the Hughes House. Sometimes we call it the Little Green House. And actually, Howard Hughes lived here back in the 50s before he became a recluse. Interesting fact, it was only one of 3 houses he ever lived in.
Right away. I'll call you right back. Right back. You got it.
The house was used for a scene in the famous Las Vegas mob movie Casino, which tells the story of Las Vegas mobsters Lefty Rosenthal and Tony Spilatro, played by Robert De Niro and Joe Pesci. Now, in the movie, it was used as the home of the character portrayed by James Woods, and it was seen when Sharon Stone's character runs off to LA with him.
Helping us tell the story is George Knapp, of course, has worked at 8 News Now for decades, and Bob Stoddall, a legendary newsman, anchor and news director, and just about every job you can have at a news station. He now sits on the Historic Preservation Board.
So both Bob and George are really just lifelong students of history. So they're going to tell us the story of the Hughes House from the very beginning, from the 1953, because that was the year that Hughes fell in love with Las Vegas and leased this house.
This is a transition point in his life, coming in and staying at the greenhouse.
When was he actually here?
Started in the spring of 1953 and left 8 or 9 months later in 54.
But he lived here. He was staying here.
He was staying here, and you could tell he was staying here because when it was opened, there was a loaf of bread, half eaten. The cabinets were filled with these little cereals, Post cereals, Roy Rogers little things. So this is where he slept and he ate, had breakfast in the morning, or whatever his morning, could be.
What was going on in Hughes's life and in the world at that time?
Well, in 1953, we had just ended, so to speak, with an armistice of the Korean War. And that was in July of 53. That had been going on since for the previous 2 or 3 years. We were right in the middle of the Cold War. And Hughes, at that moment, while he was in this house, was still thinking about building a defense plant in southern Nevada, right where Summerlin is now, because he owned all that land that he bought in the mid-40s, about 1942 or 43, 44. And he wanted to build a defense plant there. He started creating and having written a movie about Las Vegas with Jane Russell and Vincent Price. And that premiered in February of 1952 here in Las Vegas. It had been shooting for the previous 12, 18 months. So he had really refocused his life into Las Vegas. He liked Las Vegas. He liked, in the sense, the small town of it, other than there was the entertainment and the casinos that he could quietly go in and wouldn't be bothered. Where in Los Angeles, he didn't feel comfortable doing that. It was designed nicely. We have it in 1949. 2 good-sized bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, large living room, decent-sized kitchen, and this dining room area. It was a good-sized house. The Hughes House was really state-of-the-art for 1953 because of what Hughes wanted. The entire facility, all the doors, before you could get inside the house, you had to open an outside door, go into the sealed chambers, shut the door, and then you would be allowed into this area. He wanted no dust. He wanted the air controlled completely.
And it was cutting edge for its time then.
It was, the whole house, they say, was cutting edge. Everything from the telecommunication to the air conditioning unit to the kitchen. Of course, he was a very wealthy man at that time, and he had the Hughes Tool Company, so he could tell, I want this done, and they would come up and do it, of course.
What's in the box of treasures?
The items in here are all from Howard Hughes' house when it was opened back in 1976. It's a torn piece out of the Las Vegas Sun, and on it are Acapulco 1016, Mr. White, Mrs. Chambers, just some odd writing from Howard Hughes.
This is Howard Hughes' doodles.
And then it has 35, 198, 10, $85, 5 units. Just a wonderful piece of what was Howard Hughes thinking when he did this, because he tore it out. He wanted to save it, so he tore it off out of the Las Vegas Sun. So that's just a great piece of mystery. Inside, Howard Hughes had state of the art, largely because he had a hearing problem. So all of his telephones had specially built wooden boxed amplifiers, and from that he would then plug in a headset. This is one of the headsets. There were 5 of the headsets with each of the wooden boxes, each of the phones that were here. Whichever room he was in, he would have a headset. So he would unplug one and leave it there, go to the next room or the bedroom.
What did he use this room for?
When we were first in this room back in 1976, all the windows were covered, and this was the viewing room, the projector room. A screen was there, and if I remember right, the screen came down from the ceiling. It was during the period that he was here, so it's 53, late 53, early 54. These were Howard Hughes's potentially future toothbrushes, pro-tufted, pro-prophylactic, a nylon, pro-prophylactic, bristles of DuPont nylon, and a comb. And then there was, next to that, there was a palm olive soap. All of this stuff has been and will be assigned to the Nevada State Museum here in Las Vegas for future generations. And my favorite piece, and this was one that was given to me by Mark Smith, it's a telephone book from the Wilbur Clark Desert Inn. Of course, Hughes wanted to be close to the Desert Inn, and it's from April of 1953.
It's the month I was born.
So this is the Southern Nevada Telephone Directory, and it's just got this beautiful cover from Wilbur Clark's Desert Inn. So these items will all are going to be assigned to the Nevada State Museum.
Next, we dig into the records.
I did have to go through all of the microfiche and try to locate, these documents and make sure I was getting everything right.
The Clark County Assessor helps us trace the history of the Hughes House. We're exploring the Hughes House, the little green bungalow in our KLAS parking lot once owned by the eccentric and reclusive billionaire Howard Hughes. But he didn't always own it. To help us sort through the history of the house, we talked to Clark County Assessor Brianna Johnson.
And of course, I have the old drawing, and of course, as you can tell, it's hard to see, but there is the old drawing of what this looked like when it was here.
Yeah, we're trying to put together the definitive history of what we've always called the Hughes House. What did you dig up and what did you find?
Okay, well, let's talk a little bit about that. What I was able to find out is that this house, which is the Blair House, the assessor's office has on record that it was built in 1951. And then it looks like in 1955, James and Beatrice Fulcher purchased the property from leasehold funding. And then they also, at the same time, deeded it over to Blair House, Inc. Those two, James and Beatrice Fulcher and Blair House, Inc., were the same. They were the same people. And 1972 rolls around, and then we show that Hughes Tool Company has now purchased the property. And then in 1978, and still the current owner is KLAS.
Howard Hughes' name never directly appears on the list of owners. He leased it when he stayed here in 1953 and 54, but it was later bought by the company he owned long after he left the house, the Hughes Tool Company.
So Howard Hughes doesn't appear anywhere on there, but I don't ever recognize that company, Leasehold Funding. Just sounds like a front company of real estate.
Possibly, yeah, not sure who that was back then. But yeah, the only thing we show is the Hughes Tool Company.
Hughes Tool Company later became Summa Corporation after he sold the tool division, and that company is now known as the Howard Hughes Corporation, which built Summerlin. Summa Corporation bought and owned the land and KLAS.
Did you have fun looking up all this stuff?
I did. I learned a lot, and it is such an honor and a privilege to come in and look around and just see this building still standing and in good condition.
Up next, Hughes dies, and the search for his will is on.
So his lawyers and the IRS come in, they tear up the walls, they're looking for the will and what other goodies.
The battle over the Hughes fortune and what that meant for the Hughes house. We're exploring the story of the Hughes House, the green bungalow in our parking lot. Former KLAS news director Bob Stodahl describes to me the scene after Hughes passed away.
Howard Hughes dies in the 1970s. How quickly do people descend on the Hughes House looking for stuff?
Days, within weeks. The first thing they're looking for, of course, is the will. And the first people that broke the seals, and there were multiple seals on this house. First of all, there are the original seals that had to come in, it was sealed off so the dust and the air wouldn't come in. And then when Hughes left in '54, he instructed his staff to seal it again. So it had this double seal around each of the doors and the windows. So they had to break the one seal and then another seal and then get into the house. And they being, I remember there was a carpenter. They brought a carpenter along because they wanted to find out if there was anything in the walls, hidden in the walls. But it was Hughes's legal staff and the Internal Revenue Service had some agents here. And so they knocked on any hollow spot, ripped it off, literally ripped it off. I mean, they're just pieces of plywood and wood all through the house. And over here is where they had a hollow spot, and they jackhammered in this doorway here because there was a hollow spot there. And as soon as they started jackhammering, they realized that this was a door or safe.
So why were they looking for the Hughes will? Because when Howard Hughes died on April 5th, 1976, he didn't leave one. His vast fortune was up for grabs. That is, until a mysterious document surfaced, leaving a chunk of his money to a man named Melvin Dumar and more to the Mormon Church. Dumar says he was on his way to Los Angeles in December 1967, driving across the Nevada desert, just past the Cottontail Ranch brothel, when he spotted a disheveled old man on the side of the highway.
He was laying in the middle of a dirt road right off the highway, about 100 yards or so off the highway. When I found him, I thought I'd found a dead body. And so I picked him up and put him in the car and took him to Vegas.
What happened?
He gave the man a lift into Las Vegas and chuckled at the passenger's wild claim that he was billionaire Howard Hughes.
Wino laying out in the middle of the desert.
The story of that fateful drive was told later in an Oscar-winning film, Melvin and Howard. Dumar chatted with the disheveled old derelict, sang him a few original songs, and even gave him some pocket money when dropping him off as requested behind a strip hotel. During the drive, Dumar says he told the old guy he had tried but failed to get a job at Hughes Aviation.
He told me that he knew something about Hughes Aircraft because he owned it. That's how he said it? Yeah, he said, oh, I'm familiar with that. I think his words, I'm familiar with that because I own it. And I thought, yeah, right. Sure you do. You look like a bum. I thought you'd be somebody from Skid Row. That was my impression of him.
After a frantic search for the will proved unsuccessful, Dumar says someone showed up at a gas station in Utah and dropped off the so-called Mormon will, which left 1/16 of Hughes' fortune to Melvin.
Looking forward to another day?
Not really.
It set off a vicious legal fight over the Hughes estate and nearly destroyed Dumar's life.
For the most part, it was like a nightmare, and I was just totally got paranoid, because of helping him out. I used to get death threats and everything else.
A film about that saga won 2 Oscars, but was a legal loser for Melvin Dumar. Nonetheless, the Mormon will proved eerily accurate and also contained goofy flaws. A Las Vegas court ruled it a forgery, with suspicion focused on Melvin Dumar. As it turned out, though, all of the parties listed in the discredited will eventually got some of Hughes' money, with one exception.
Except for me. I'm the only one that never seen a penny of it.
There have been a few changes since the house was torn up for the will. Landmark, which bought the station and the house after Hughes owned them, restored the home as a rental property for executives and management. It was also a place to hold station events or show off to major clients, and even some prospective employees stayed there.
My parents stayed here. Different advertising executives that would come to town would stay here.
The bungalows with the house were converted into rental apartments. Those extra bungalows were turned into a parking lot in 1997. But the house where Hughes stayed was left up.
This is an important piece of Las Vegas history, and it's going to be more important as time goes by. You look at what's occurring on the Las Vegas Strip now. When Howard Hughes tried to buy the Stardust Hotel, the Justice Department said, no. You'll have a monopoly. Today, that's completely different.
In an effort to preserve the history of the place, it was decorated with historic photos and memorabilia to help tell the story of one of the world's most eccentric men. They showcased all aspects of Hughes' life: billionaire, movie producer, aviation pioneer, playboy, innovative aircraft designer, and pilot.
This is just a wonderful blown-up image of Howard Hughes when he was shooting Hell's Angels.
This map details the world aviation speed record achieved by Hughes and his crew in 1938, when they circled the globe in 3 days and 19 hours. This picture shows the ticker tape parade in New York City when he returned. This is a memo from Hughes requesting photos of women he had seen in the 1950s magazine I, reportedly to recruit starlets for movies, and also to find women to date. Included was a handwritten note, "No further pursuit necessary," near a woman's name. What is the future of the Hughes House? We explore that next.
What should happen to this house? I mean, there have been stories over the years about plans to tear it down or move it. I mean, it seems like its value is being at the place where it really was used by Hughes.
Well, the value of any historic structure or property diminishes historically when you move it from its original site. That said, it has been done several times successfully in Las Vegas. We're able to move the railroad cottages built in 1910. Several of them have been moved to the Las Vegas Springs Preserve, and we put them on lot sizes identical to the lots that were in 1910, and the insides have been preserved. So the last step is destruction, and that this house should not be destroyed. Between keeping it in place and moving it to a safe and secure place, I would prefer that this house stayed where it is.
So George, there's a lot of stories about how this house was kind of passed down. I know, Hughes only lived there for about a year, but then when they opened it, there was all this stuff inside.
Yeah, there's a lot of cool stories. Up on top of the house, there was a spruce goose weather vane that stayed there for years without anybody noticing it. The closets inside the house were packed with suits. There was food left on the tables as well. It was as if Howard Hughes planned to come back at some point. He sealed the whole thing, and it stayed sealed for 22 years.
Whether that food was edible remains in question. Now, you've probably seen the house in many a live shot we've done over the years, things like wrapping up your pipes in the winter, but there's a whole lot of history wrapped up in here. And George, we thank you for getting to the bottom of it.
Yeah, the I-Team has birthed many stories in that building, I'll tell you.